divorced when I was 6. During the summer, I preferred staying at my dad's single-story ranch-style house in a quiet cul-de-sac as opposed to my mom's place in the city. My dad's place was much quieter and had a better feeling of privacy with its big fenced-in backyard. During the warmer months, I would enjoy sleeping with my window cracked open and my fan on. In the city, it was always too noisy to have a window open at night. I remember at the time my dad was usually working late and would arrive home around 8 p.m. or later, so the majority of the day I was alone. I would spend my time on my dad's computer, using the dial-up internet. Back in those days, if you wanted to use the internet, you had to keep in mind that you were sacrificing your ability to use the phone. You also had to sit at a desk all day when you surfed the web. On this particular day, it was getting pretty late, and I had been sitting for a while, so I decided to get up and make myself a snack. The sunlight was fading outside, and it was just starting to get dark. But I didn't turn on any lights as I walked down the hallway and turned into the kitchen. Using the light from inside the fridge, I began to shuffle around looking for something to make a sandwich out of, when I heard something that made me pause. Back inside my room, I had a lamp on my nightstand that had these tiny charms hanging from the shade. Whenever I went to raise or lower my window, the nightstand would shake, and the charms would make tiny wind chime type sounds. I was used to the sound, but I had never once heard it from outside my room, because I was the only one who ever touched my window. And for such a small sound, I was surprised how far it traveled. There was this animalistic moment where my entire body froze, and I felt my sense of hearing dial itself up to 11 as I strained to catch every small noise coming from my room. I heard a couple of footsteps on my carpet, some muffled voices, and I heard the creak of my door opening. I let the fridge door swing shut and rushed over to the back door, but as soon as I opened it, I paused. Out the back door led to our screened-in back porch, which led outside to our fenced-in yard. Going through the screen door would make way too much noise, and whoever was now in the house would be able to catch me before I was able to unlock the gate to exit the backyard. I would have to run back towards the intruders to get to the front door, so not knowing what else to do, I ducked into a small closet right next to the fridge, where my dad kept the vacuum. There was barely enough room inside for me to stand up straight, and I knew that if they happened to open the door, I was caught. So I kept my hand on the doorknob to hold it closed. I heard 2 sets of footsteps walking down the front hall, and suddenly somebody was in the kitchen. He wasn't even being cautious. He was just sauntering around, opening cabinets and drawers like he belonged there. I heard him open the fridge right next to me and knock a few things around inside. I heard an annoyed voice coming from the hallway. "What the hell are you doing?" The second voice responded. "I'm starving, man. I haven't eaten all day. Get the fuck out of there," the first voice snapped. The fridge door shut abruptly, and suddenly there was a tug on the handle of the closet I was hiding in. I tensed, and I held the door latch firm. All the guy had to do was pull on it hard, and I would have toppled right onto the floor. "Hey, this one's locked." The voice came from right outside the door. As soon as I heard it, I knew I was done, and I mentally prepared myself to be kidnapped or murdered. The second voice came again over by the back door. "Hey, did you open this?" "No, why?" "And somebody was just here. They must have run out back." I heard both of the intruders run out to the back porch. I could have taken that moment to run, but I was shaking so hard at me nearly getting caught that I didn't trust myself to try and take a step. I thought about trying to go for the cordless phone on the counter, but I remembered the dial-up internet was still using the phone line. After another few moments, the 2 men ran back into the house and made for the front door. I heard the front door unlock and swing open. They hadn't been out of the house for more than 5 seconds before I heard a police siren wailing as it drove past the house. Turns out my neighbor had spotted the 2 men walking around outside and called the cops as soon as she noticed them opening my window from the outside. They were kids themselves, really. One was 18 and the other was 19. My dad arrived home shortly after, and we ended up staying at my aunt's for the night. I was incredibly shaken for the next several days, and the smallest of noises made me anxious, and I was too afraid to be alone. Looking back now, Those two kids likely would have taken off running if they had found me. They didn't even have any weapons on them. But at the time, I didn't know that, and the experience traumatized my tiny 11-year-old mind. Who would have thought on a quiet cul-de-sac with houses surrounding me on all sides, and the sun not even completely gone, that my house would be invaded? The city may be noisier, but at least at the time, it was safer.
Conjuring 2. We were so excited because we were going to watch the horror movie alone with no adults. We were going to go with my older cousin, but they let us go alone because it was my cousin's birthday. When we went to the theater, we got popcorn and snacks to watch the movie. When we went inside the room and got into our seats, I noticed a woman dressed up as a nun. At first I got scared, but then I thought it could be a staff member. I told my cousin, and then we just got excited. The nun sat down a few rows behind us and watched the movie. When me and my cousin were watching the movie, I turned to see the nun, who was now looking at me. She was sitting down, but had her head turned to look at me. I got scared and told my cousin. She told me to ignore it, so I did. For the next half hour, I focused on the movie. Then I turned to the nun, who was now even closer to our seats. I panicked and told my cousin. She looked at the nun and told me the movie was about to finish and not to worry. I was scared the whole rest of the movie. I wanted to turn my head to see where the nun was, but I was scared that she might be closer. When I finally turned to look, I didn't see her. I was relieved, but then I noticed a black head in the row in front of me. It was the nun. I got so scared, I couldn't even talk, so I just poked my cousin's arm and pointed at the nun. My cousin was scared now, so she told me to change seats to get closer to the stairs by the exit. We changed seats, and I just kept looking at the nun. At this time, the movie had been out for a few days already, so there weren't many people in the seats. I was still watching the nun, but I was also watching the movie. At one point, I forgot about the nun until there was a creepy scene, and then I magically remembered the nun. I turned to look for her, and she was standing at the end of our row. When I saw her standing there, I couldn't tell if she was looking at us or at the stairs, but I was confident she was staring at us. I told my cousin, and she got creeped out. She told me that if the nun came any closer, we should jump into the front rows. I agreed, so for the rest of the movie, we just kept an eye on the nun. In the movie, there were lots of screams, which made us focus on the movie and then on the nun. We looked back at the movie for a moment, and then I heard footsteps. I turned and could tell that the nun had gotten closer. I told my cousin, and she noticed too. We were about to look back at the nun when she started to walk very fast to our seats. My cousin was closest to the stairs, so she got up and went running down the stairs, and I jumped over the row of seats. The nun was just laughing. We turned back to look at the seats, and the lights of the movie theater turned on. We could see the nun holding a knife and laughing at us. She was pointing the knife at us with a creepy grin. We just ran out of the room, screaming, and a worker at the theater asked us what was wrong. I told him everything, and then the nun came out of the theater, laughing. She still had the knife, and then she randomly started to stab everything and everyone in her way. Her target was us, so we ran out of the whole theater, and luckily there were police officers passing by. They got the woman and took her to the police station for an investigation. We had to go with them to tell them everything that happened. It turned out the nun was a mentally ill woman that escaped her institution and went into random movie theaters dressed as the staff to be able to get inside. Then she changed into her nun costume. Apparently, she stabbed 12 people in the theater, but thankfully they survived. Me and my cousin were in shock, and we immediately called our parents. They were so relieved that we were okay. After that night, we called each other and had sleepovers, but never again will we go alone to a movie theater.
In the penthouse, the killer had cut his mouth from ear to ear with a knife and nailed the corners of his mouth up to his temples. The man was found dead with his eyes rolled back and a grotesque grin on his face. The residents of the apartment lived in fear, and the investigation was slow as the murderer scene yielded no evidence of the killer. 3 days after the incident, the same video was sent simultaneously to the cell phones of all the residents of the apartment building from a mysterious number. The video showed a clown looking at the screen and giggling in an unnerving manner, saying, "Smile, smile, smile." He then picked up the camera and showed us his surroundings, the penthouse of the man who died a few days earlier. The man was tied to a chair, crying out for help, and the clown pulled out a sharp knife and began to slice the man's mouth open. After slicing the screaming, struggling man's mouth from ear to ear, the clown held the corner of the man's mouth up, smiled for the camera, and then took out a hammer and began hammering nails into the corner of the mouth. The clown giggled as he spun around in the swiveled chair to which the man was strapped with his mouth torn open and a wide grin on his face. Then the screen suddenly went black, and the words, "James, room 503 next," appeared in white letters on a dark background. My heart sank and I sat back in my seat. The fact that the clown knew my name and my home address gave me goosebumps. How did he know me, and why was I his next target? I hadn't done anything to earn someone's grudge. While I sat there in a panic, other residents who had seen the video called the police and officers came to my house. They asked me if I knew who the clown was, and I suddenly realized that the man next door in room 504 might be the culprit. I had been losing sleep over the past few nights due to a thumping noise coming from my neighbor. One night I went to bed before an important meeting the next day, and again I heard a thumping noise from my neighbors. So I went over to their house after midnight and rang the doorbell. "Who is it?" The suspicious-looking man next door opened the front door with a hanger, and through the narrow doorway I could see he was holding a hammer. I don't know what he was doing in the middle of the night, but that hammer seemed to be the source of the noise. "It's your neighbor. You're being too loud and I need to get some sleep," I said in an irritated tone to the man, who glared at me for a moment before slamming the front door. I told the police that I heard the man next door hammering every night and had seen him with a hammer myself, so I suspected he was the culprit. The police listened to my story and they said they would take a closer look at the man next door. When the police returned, I couldn't bear to stay in the apartment, so I took an extended leave of absence from work, packed up my things, and went down to the countryside to live with my parents. I stayed at my parents' house for about a month, and there were no more murders in the apartment because the police were keeping an eye on the man next door. With this lull, I returned to the apartment on my last day of vacation. I walked into the lobby of my apartment building and was greeted by the doorman with a big smile on his face. "You're back home. I'm so glad you're safe." "Yes, it's been a while." After a long drive, I was too tired to answer the man's friendly greeting, so I gave a rough answer and I waited for the elevator. He told me that he saw the man next door lurking in front of my door a few days ago, and that he's going to take me there because he thinks it might be dangerous. When we got to the 5th floor and the elevator doors opened, I saw my neighbor standing in front of my front door, smoking a cigarette. The man's eyes looked murderous, and I was terrified. So I asked the doorman to go inside the house with me. He and I walked past the neighbor in a tense moment, and suddenly the neighbor lunged at me from behind, grabbed me from the back of the head, and started dragging me into his house. "Help me!" I shouted, frightened. The doorman quickly picked up my suitcase and slammed it down on the man's head as hard as he could, and the man collapsed, bleeding on the spot. "What do we do now? I think he's dead," I asked him, breathing heavily. He looked surprised and broke out in a cold sweat. "I didn't think he would die. Isn't this considered self-defense? Let's get him inside the house before anyone sees him and think about it." He and I picked up the fallen man and hurried him inside the house. "I don't think anyone else has seen him yet," he said, looking out the front door. Just then, the man next door, whom I thought was dead, struggled to raise his head and shouted, "Run!" Suddenly, the doorman pulled out a knife from his pocket and slashed the man's mouth wide with a single blow, and the man screamed and died with one side of his mouth torn off. When I saw the scene, I was so stunned that my whole body went rigid. The doorman said,
"Whew, that could have been really bad."
He breathed a sigh of relief and took off his jumper, revealing a colorful clown costume hidden inside. He smiled up at me, put on the clown mask, and said,
"Hello, James, from room 503. You didn't smile when I smiled and greeted you in the lobby every day. The people who live here are so unkind. Anyone who doesn't respond back to my smile will keep smiling even after they die."
Significant other, and I wanted to see other people. I took up online dating on this app that I don't want to name. I never told my parents about my previous relationship, or the guys that I talked to online, so they know nothing about this story. But I still need to tell them one day. Anyway, within a short period of time, I received lots of messages from guys. Most of them were perverts, or just didn't catch my attention, until a cute guy messaged me. I forgot his name, so we'll just call him Justin. Justin was around 23 years old at the time. When he messaged me, he told me how attractive I was and showered me with affection and romantic text messages. I was naive at the time, so I was awed and blushed when he told me all that. We started to get to know each other. He was living in Canada, and I was a Polish girl living in the United States. We had a few hobbies in common, and we both went to college. I was studying to be a police officer to get an associate's degree, and he was going to university to get a bachelor's degree. Then, eventually, his messages started to make me uncomfortable. He said that he preferred white girls over Asian girls, and that he always wanted to have sex with a white girl. He asked me if I was still a virgin, and even though I felt uncomfortable, I said yes. He started talking to me sexually, and I didn't like it, but I complied. Then he asked me if I could visit him sometime in Canada, even though I just met him a couple days ago. Living with my parents in a strict Polish household, I told him that I couldn't because of that. He then argued that I was an adult and I could make my own decisions, which was true, but as a Polish person, you still have to listen to your parents even though you're an adult. Of course, I did tell him that I lived in the United States, but I didn't tell him exactly where I live. He then asked me if I lived in XYZ town in XYZ state. I was shocked when he asked this because I never told him exactly where I lived, and on my profile, I did not give out my location, so I have no idea how he found out about that. I lied to him and said that I didn't, but he said I was lying, and I confessed. Then he asked me for my address, but I refused to give it to him. He got angry and said that everyone gave their address out, which of course I knew wasn't true. I then blocked him, but the story doesn't end there. A few weeks later, I heard that in my neighborhood, there was a break-in. 2 men broke into a house, but they didn't steal anything. Instead, they might have been looking for someone. My heart jumped when I heard this. Justin was looking for me. A couple houses later, and they gave up. I waited a while later, and I have not heard about anything like this again. I dread to think what might have happened if Justin found the right house in my neighborhood and kidnapped me.
I loved getting my fortune told since I was young. So even as an adult, I would frequently visit fortune tellers. Eventually, I became a regular visitor at one particular fortune-telling shop and would visit periodically. The fortune teller there was eerily accurate. He told me, "Soon your boss at work will have a major accident, and you'll get a promotion." Surprisingly, not long after that, my boss really did get into a major car accident, and I was promoted. Intrigued, I asked the fortune teller how he could predict the future so accurately. He claimed that, unlike other fortune tellers, he communicated directly with demons to foresee the future. I felt scared, but couldn't stop going there because his predictions were just too accurate. He told me that demons could do anything, and many of his clients had become wealthy with the help of demons. However, in order to fulfill a wish, one had to pay a large price to the demons. When I asked him what that price was, he fell silent and made a chilling expression before finally speaking. Every night I go to hell in my dreams and meet demons. I need to play with them there, since causing pain to others is their only happiness. So they whip and beat me with iron clubs, taking pleasure in it. I must endure this pain completely. Only then will they grant my wishes. But it's okay. I won't die because it's just a dream. The intensity of the torture just increases depending on the size of the wish. I couldn't sleep that night and thought for a long time. If I could have everything I wanted. There was one thing that came to mind. My wish was to date the girl I'd been in love with for 3 years. The next day, I went to him and told him I wanted to date this girl. After thinking for a while, he said, "Changing someone's heart is very difficult. It requires altering destiny. If I ask the demons for this, they will demand a high price. I'll have to endure terrible torture." After more contemplation, he said, "So, I'll need $20,000. I was shocked by the huge amount, but I had no choice. I spent all my savings, took out loans, and went to him a few days later. He didn't seem happy, even after receiving the $20,000. He was trembling and sweating profusely. And then, a few days later, something incredible happened. The girl I had a crush on contacted me, and we really started dating. I was extremely happy every day. I thought meeting the fortune teller was truly a blessing. Grateful, I bought him a gift and went to see him again. But no one was living in that house anymore. Shocked, I asked the neighbor where the fortune teller had gone. She turned pale and told me, "Didn't you hear? He died. One night there was a terrible scream from his house, so the police were called. When they arrived, they found him dead. But the strange thing is, he seemed to have coughed up blood while sleeping, and the whole house was covered in blood. There were no signs of an intruder, and he was alone. It's a truly horrifying story." I was speechless, shocked by the news. I haven't been able to tell anyone this story since that day. The most terrifying thing is that ever since then, I occasionally hear the fortune teller's voice whispering in my ear during my sleep. "Mr. Miller, I'm in hell. All thanks to you."
Had a very happy marriage. He was a nice and sweet husband to me, like a cotton candy, and at the same time, a strong man capable of defeating a lion. However, I don't remember when it began, but he was getting wasting away. Every morning, he woke up screaming and asked me if this was a dream, almost every 10 minutes. And before he fell asleep every night, he shouted like,
"Oh God, please Jesus, protect me!"
even though he had no religion. One day, when I asked him what's wrong with him, he whispered in my ear after looking around with a frightened face.
"For the last few days, the same man's been chasing me in my dreams."
His voice was trembling. I told him, "Hey, Mr. Tough Guy, it's just a dream. What's so scary about it?" Suddenly, his eyes got hugely dilated and he got out of breath. And he said,
You know the guy next door, Jacob? He died the other day in his sleep of a heart attack, right? Well, the night before his death, I was being chased by that man in the dream. And I fled to Jacob's house, and that man, I saw him entering Jacob's room.
"Honey, what do you mean?" I asked. Then Jack said,
Jacob was killed by that man.
He started sobbing like a 10-year-old kid. A few days later, while waking up screaming again early in the morning, he fell out of bed. Then he suddenly rushed out of the room. I shouted, running after him, "Honey, you are at home. You are safe." And Jack shouted back,
No! This is a dream! You are not my wife, you devil! I'm jumping out of this apartment and going back to the real world!
and he ran to the window and put his foot on the windowsill. I ran to him at full speed and slapped him so hard in the face. Then he finally said with a shocked look,
Oh, yes. You are real.
I asked what's really happening to him, and he said the man, this time, chased him to our house. According to Jack, the man in his dream was about 12 feet tall and his head took up almost half of the height. He had 3 pupils each and violet skin. When he opened his mouth, Jack saw hundreds of disgusting black teeth. He was in a black suit and his legs looked like goats. When Jack shouted to him,
You're just a nightmare!
the man said,
I am death.
laughing shrilly. However, Jack said he was laughing with a crying face, which made him look creepier. While he was laughing, those hundreds of teeth made some ear-splitting sound, like hundreds of metal pieces scratching each other. And Jack's eardrums were so painful, as if those were about to be torn. Extremely frightened, Jack started running away as fast as his legs could carry him. The man also started running after Jack, shouting like,
Oh, death! Death is beautiful! Beautiful death!
It made Jack extremely paralyzed by fear. Jack's legs were wobbling and turning to jelly. He kept falling down on the ground, but tried to run and run as if his life completely depended on it. Finally, the man came up to him right under his nose and opened his mouth, shouting,
Death is beautiful!
At that moment, Jack bit his own tongue and, luckily, woke up from the dream. When he was awakened, he was terribly bleeding from the tongue and taken to the hospital right away. But even the doctor couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. After long hesitation, we this time visited a shaman. However, as soon as the shaman saw Jack, she shouted with a deathly pale face, "You met him!" I cried on my knees and desperately begged for help. Clicking her tongue, she closed her eyes. After thinking deeply for a while, she opened her lips to speak. Listen, this is what you must do from tonight. First, sleep in somewhere else you've never been. You must not tell anybody where you are, even your family or friends. Second, before going to bed, put on clown makeup. He must not recognize your face. Third, if he chases you in your dream, just run away. That's the only way you can survive. Do not go into any other person's place, otherwise innocent one will be killed because of you. Run until you reach the river or sea. He cannot swim. Don't even think of going up to a high place. He is faster on the stairs. After saying like this, she kicked us out. That night, Jack went to a nearby motel and slept with clown makeup on. Surprisingly, the man didn't appear in the dream on that night. The next day, Jack was deeply relieved and trying to sleep in the motel again. However, that night, Jack had a dream again of the man. He opened the door and entered the room, but he didn't recognize Jack in clown makeup. Tilting his head, he just kept staring at Jack. Jack slowly got out of there and kept walking away to escape. And the man also followed him for hours, still confused. Then, all of a sudden, he shouted,
There you are!
and started running after him at full speed. My husband had to run away again all night long. That way, there was no way to stop the nightmare. Next morning, Jack became unable to walk on his own and was taken to hospital again. The doctor said,
Geez, how long did you run? All your leg joints and muscles are broken. You're gonna have to use a wheelchair for quite a while.
The next night, Jack had to run on a wheelchair for his life in the dream, and when he woke up in the next morning, he became unable to move his arms at all because the arm muscles were entirely broken. Now, there was no option for him but to be hospitalized. Since that day, Jack desperately had struggled to stay awake. Although the doctor kept asking to sleep and rest for recovery, he just drank a lot of coffee to keep himself awake. He had stayed up all through the night every day. On the third day without sleep, his health looked far worse. He even started kicking up a rumpus in the hospital, freaking out with fear and anxiety. My poor Jack begged the doctor to stop dreaming, on his knees. The doctor injected a tranquilizer, saying,
This should put you in a deep sleep, without dreaming.
Jack grabbed the doctor by the collar and screamed,
If I sleep, I'm going to die!
drifting off to sleep. Looking at him asleep, the doctor said,
Ma'am, your husband is severely mentally deranged. He will receive treatment in the psych ward tomorrow.
Then he left the room. And the next day, just an unbelievable thing happened. In the morning, Jack was found on the floor right next to his bed. He was dead, and his body was already ice cold. He was curled up as if he was attacked hard by something. And what I found on his body was hundreds of red spots, and all of the joints of his arms and legs terribly broken. His tongue was also cut off. The doctor got embarrassed because he could not find a single clue, because Jack was healthy and didn't have any illness, as even I had no idea what killed him. One thing I could think of was that dream. Until now, there are so many questions in my mind that I could never solve. Who was that man, and why? For what reason he showed up in Jack's dream? Everything still remains mysterious. If you see this man in your dream, run. Just run away. And never, ever get caught.
He was around his 60s and introduced himself to me. His name was Tom. He was the only one who spoke English fluently in our neighborhood, but he always tried to speak our native language. He seemed really nice at first. One day after school, my friends and I saw a new cafe in our neighborhood. We were curious and wanted to know how many desserts they had, so we stopped by and looked inside. Then we heard someone say, "Hello, kids." He then said, "Come on in. You can have all the desserts you want for free." Without thinking, we went inside and stayed there for 2 hours. After that, we soon stayed there almost every day after school. Everyone started to like Tom. One day, we went to his cafe like we usually did, but for some reason, I felt kind of uncomfortable. Because at some point, I noticed that there were only kids inside his shop. Tom came to me and said, "Hey, I saw you yesterday with a cat. Do you like cats?" I said yes, and he proceeded to talk to me more. He told me that he has 8 cats in his house and showed me pictures of his cats. All of a sudden, one of his pictures from inside his wallet fell to the floor. I picked it up and I could see a girl's face with blonde curly hair and green eyes. I thought that she was his granddaughter, but what he told me next was a huge shock. He said, "Oh, this is my wife. She lives in London right now." I was confused because the girl in the picture was just a kid, maybe 14 or 15 years old. I thought that he was lying or something. Then I got up. "Oh, I forgot. My mom is waiting for me." So I quickly left the shop and went back home. Then I just hugged my mom. The next day when I got to school, there were policemen everywhere. I didn't understand what was going on. Then one police officer walked over to me and he said, "Kid, you have to come with us." They also called my parents, so we went to the police station together. It turned out that Tom's warrant was served. They found lots of data on his computer about the young girls who were raped by him. He even lied about his name. His real name was Hardin. The worst and most horrible thing was when they entered his room. The entire wall was covered with my pictures. When they said this to my parents, I was terrified, so I fainted. The police arrested him, and he was put in jail for several years. Now I'm 18 years old, but I am still afraid. According to my neighbors, he's returning to our neighborhood. I don't want to go out, and I don't even know what to do. If anyone has any advice, please help me and let me know what I should do.
I was in Carmel. The sun was slowly starting to set as we continued driving. As my mom started to get tired of driving, my dad spotted a nice-looking hotel that was pushed back in the forest. My mom pulled over and we walked towards the hotel. The place seemed nice, but I had a bad feeling about the hotel. My dad asked the lady at the front desk if there were any spare rooms that we could stay in for the night. The lady surprisingly said yes, but that our shower was broken and that unfortunately they wouldn't be able to fix it. But she said we could use the community showers on the second floor. We took the elevator up to our room and set down our things. I decided before I went to bed that I would use the community showers. As I walked to the showers, I realized that they were much different than normal showers. To start off, there was a door connecting the boys' community showers to the girls' community showers. Secondly, instead of shower curtains, they had glass doors. So much for privacy. As I looked around, I realized the showers were completely empty. I thought to myself, if I took a quick shower, then I wouldn't have to worry about anyone walking in. I hopped in and washed myself. As time went on, the glass started to get very foggy and I couldn't see anything outside. I heard the door that connected the boys' showers to the girls' showers open. Why the hell would a boy want to come in here? Since I couldn't see anything, I decided to wipe my hand on the glass to get rid of the fog. As I did that, I saw a homeless man in his mid-40s with greasy hair, with his face directly on the glass looking at me with a smirk. As I looked down, I saw he was holding a large kitchen knife. I screamed and I opened the glass door as fast as I could, knocking the guy to the ground. I quickly grabbed a towel and ran out. I ran to our room and told my parents what happened. They immediately called the police and they arrived and searched the showers. They found him knocked out in the same position I had knocked him out in. Apparently, he was a registered sex offender, and even went as far as to raping a girl my age. They arrested him, and I'm not sure what they did after that. This story still terrifies me to this day, and I never went back to the hotel in fear that I might see him again.
I still regret those days. Well, more specifically, what I regret is not about being a school bully back then. My regret originates from a terrible memory, which I'm going to tell you about now. In those days, I and my friends, Tom and Blake, used to hang out together and bully others. And there was one classmate, in particular, we victimized the most. I can't mention his name here, but we used to call him the punching machine. We often punched him and asked what our score was. Then he rated us, and we continued to punch him until each of us got a higher, more satisfactory score. He was a big guy, about 6'3" tall, who used to be beaten by others. Even after we became adults, we often went to him and bullied him. One fall day, the sky looked exceptionally blood red, and it has bled into my memory as the day. While we were bullying him as usual, he suddenly put out his hand, saying this: "It feels like I'm gonna cry. Please stop it, or I'll cry and all of you guys will be dead." It froze us for a second, but soon Tom burst into laughter and said,
If you cry, what? We're gonna be dead? Yeah, maybe. We are gonna die laughing, you dumbass.
Then Blake said,
Uh-oh, seriously. We have never seen him crying. Let's make it real today.
Then this dude roared super loudly like a big lion, and his tears started falling to the ground. It was the first time we saw him crying. His shoulders heaved like crazy, and he breathed in and out so heavily, like it was almost penetrating into the ground. When we realized he was getting enraged, he suddenly pounced on Tom and choked him. Tom struggled hard to escape from him, but he was no match for him at all. He squeezed Tom's throat with incredible power, and Tom's eyes were about to pop out of his head. Then he threw Tom against the wall. Tom slammed into the wall and just passed out. I thought he might be dead because Tom hit the wall so hard. He now started at me, and I looked to the side. Blake was already running away. I started shivering from top to bottom in fear. Walking slowly towards me, he said, "My mom said no one can stop me once I cry, so she's never gotten on my nerves. Neither has my dad." Suddenly, pausing for a moment, he started writhing in agony and pulling out his hair. Then he said in a low and cold voice, "I'll give you 3 seconds. Run for your life." His eyes already turned into a murderer's. His pupils were red as if smeared with blood. I thought I had to run away, but I couldn't move my legs. Before I knew, he was already right in front of me. He suddenly lifted me up without any difficulty, just like picking up a basketball or something. Then he hurled me down on the ground. As soon as I was thrown to the ground, I blacked out for a bit. After a while, I heard a police siren. Yes, Blake called the police. I opened my eyes and saw him. He was looking at me, standing still. He was still crying. He didn't run away, although the police siren was getting closer. And when he found me opening my eyes, he threw a punch at my face. I couldn't breathe. With his continuous punches, I was getting knocked out. He said, "You want to live? Then stop my tears." There was nothing I could do but tremble in overwhelming fear. At that moment, the police finally arrived, and they told him to put his hands up, but he ignored them and spoke in a low mumble, walking heavily towards the police. "No one can stop me when I cry. Even police can't." The police shouted urgently, Stop, or I'll shoot!" But he didn't stop. Instead, he rushed the police officer just in an instant. The officer immediately shot a taser at him, but he didn't stop, even though he got tased. He picked up the officer and threw him. Then another officer ran to him to arrest, but he was also knocked down to the ground by his powerful punch, just like a piece of wood. And finally, the bang, the sound of a gun. He stopped. After about 3 seconds, his knees touched the ground, and soon he fell to the ground. He was lying on the ground with his eyes wide open, not moving anymore. The officer checked his pulse on the neck, then sent the other officers a hand sign. "He's dead." My vision was blurred, but I could see the police officers running to me in a hurry. I felt like this was all a dream. No, I rather wished it was just a dream, but it wasn't. Since that day, I have emotionally suffered so much from this memory. It completely changed my personality. I can't meet anyone. I'm cooped up inside the house all the time. It has been already 10 years. Although I'm getting better little by little, this trauma still affects my whole life. If I see anyone crying, I can't stand it, and I just run away. There was also a time that I fortunately had a girlfriend, but when she cried, I ran away, like an insane man. After some time, we just broke up. Many years have passed, but I still can't overcome this trauma. Remembering that day still makes me shudder, just like a helpless tree, fluttering in the typhoon.
Unhappy. We had always struggled with poverty ever since my son was born. At times we suffered hunger, and it caused many arguments between us. My husband hadn't worked for 13 years and spent his days drinking. We were just barely getting by with whatever money I could bring. In time, we found out that our son suffered from mental health problems. However, I ended up keeping him in the house because I didn't think it was too serious. We'd never had any major accidents after all, until the incident. One day I brought home a watermelon that I had received from one of my friends. It was sweet and delicious. After finishing the watermelon, my son was so happy. He said it was the best thing he'd ever eaten. I was pleased that I could share it with him. But no one expected the disaster it would bring. In the following weeks, he became madly obsessed with watermelons. He pestered me day after day to buy him another, and started to get angry when I told him that we just didn't have the money. Once I woke up to him standing by the bed, staring down at me.
I want to eat a watermelon. A sweet watermelon.
His frantic shrieks scared me so badly. I started to take money away from our necessities, just so that I could buy him a watermelon or two every day. Whenever he woke up, he would look for the watermelons and eat them. However, he kept saying that the watermelons I brought home didn't taste the same. Not like the one my friend had given me. Sometimes he'd even throw away the half-eaten melons in anger and scream his rage. I felt so helpless, but still, I didn't want to take my child to a mental hospital. So, I decided to wait a little longer, hoping that his condition would improve. And it did. He started to seem a little happier, more stable again. I even got brave enough to tell him that our financial situation had worsened and that I couldn't buy watermelons for a while. He seemed to take the news with surprising patience. I was relieved. Then, one morning, I woke up to my son's screams.
Where's the watermelon? Give me the watermelon!
My husband and I rushed to the kitchen. I could see our son rummaging through the fridge and kitchen cabinets. When he noticed us, he started to stumble over. There was a kitchen knife in his hand.
Where's my watermelon? Watermelon. A sweet watermelon.
His eyes seemed to roll in his head in an unnatural, terrifying way. And then, suddenly, without any warning, he stabbed my husband to the side of his head. Fresh blood splashed all over. I could just stand there in utter shock. It felt like I wasn't really there. It just couldn't be real. Then my son shouted with a wide smile,
I found it!
That finally snapped me back to reality. I started screaming and called the police immediately. By the time they arrived, my husband was already dead. They found our son holding his head, crying and mumbling that the watermelon tasted odd. When he saw me with the police, he tried to come at me with the knife too.
Another watermelon.
The police overpowered him and took the knife away. At that point, I just passed out. After that, my son was confined to a mental hospital. The nurses tell me that he's still trying to search for his sweet watermelon.